Everyone, Luke here. Hope you're doing well. And in this video, it was actually inspired by a client who was wanting to know about death of the ego. Okay. Now, I'm pretty sure I've talked about this in other videos, but I was having a little bit of trouble finding it. And I thought it'd be good to do another video about death of the ego anyway. Just because it's a very important, not only a concept, but it's a very important experience that many people go through on the program. And as I've talked about before, it's actually, in my experience, the most difficult part of the program, okay? And what I mean by that is the most difficult retracing. So, your body will go through lots of retracings on the program, right? So you'll go through like sinus infections, ear infections. There might be emotional trauma that's similar to death of the ego, right? The emotional sort of stuff. Some people even have to detox past lives. I've seen that. But in my experience, physical retracings aren't that bad, right? So worst thing is, right, you might eliminate some copper, so you feel irritated for a while, or you go through a bad detox for a few days, or you might retrace a sinus infection, and even like the physical infections, where like you retrace a sinus infection or something like that. It's the worst. It's like you'll be sick for a few days. Okay, I don't want to downplay physical healing reactions, because some people they go through really bad physical healing reactions, right? And they can be painful. And some people, they have to detox for years because they had a history of drug use or something like that, and the detox is really difficult for them. So I don't want to downplay it by any means, but I'm just saying that in my experience, the ego death is more difficult, okay, for most people, especially I would say for young men, okay? And there's some reasons for that we can talk about, okay? So the reasons why the death of the ego is so difficult is, so what happens on a program, right, is your awareness will raise, okay? And that means also not only awareness of your surroundings, but your self-awareness, okay? So you'll all of a sudden become more aware of how you actually are, okay? So that means how you behave, how sick you might actually be, learning to examine your thoughts for the first time and how they might be incorrect after all. And that's why it's so difficult for many people. So, for example, let's say that you had certain truths that you hold dear your whole life, okay? Maybe you were born with them or whatever. And then all of a sudden you realize that these truths weren't the truth, because your awareness raised and you were able to examine the things that you thought were true, and all of a sudden you realized that they were not true, okay? This is also true of like aspects of yourself, right? Maybe you thought you were a certain way, or you behaved a certain way, and you identified with it, but all of a sudden you became healthier and your awareness raised, and all of a sudden you don't identify with it anymore. It's like you have to let go part of yourself, right? It's also an ego shock to all of a sudden realize that maybe a lot of things that you thought were true aren't, okay? That's very difficult to cast away those old ideas, okay? And a lot of these misconceptions we have about ourselves and our society and others, we've held on to it our whole entire life, and then all of a sudden through the program, by eating better and doing the pulling down exercise especially, our awareness is raised, and all of a sudden the light is shown on us, and we realize maybe we were being arrogant this whole time, or maybe we were quite stupid our whole lives, or maybe the religion that we followed isn't the truth, or it could be any number of things, right? And all of a sudden you realize, wow, and that can come all of a sudden, it can come pretty quickly. And then that's something that you have to go through, okay? And so it's like, what do I identify with anymore, right? If everything you held true about yourself and how the world operates is all of a sudden not true, you have to find a new there's no point of reference, right? Because it's all been cast aside. And so everything you were rooted in has been uprooted, okay? So you have to find something new to uproot yourself in. Hopefully God, or like, even like the program or the pulling down exercise, or maybe a new line of work or whatever, right? And that's very, very difficult for many people, okay? And especially, in my experience, especially for young men. Maybe it's because young men are more arrogant in a lot of ways. I think of like a young cocky dude, right? They think they know everything, right? They think they know everything about the world. And then all of a sudden they realized, they've been arrogant this whole time. and then the arrogance was washed away because they realized that they were full of, shit, right? That's very, very difficult for a young man to go through, especially for most young men in our society today that hold themselves in much higher regards than they should hold themselves, okay? Because they lack humility and they're very arrogant, okay? This is true for both sexes to a certain extent, though, but I have a lot of young male clients because I'm a young male, and it's just something that I've noticed with my young male clients, that the death of the ego is very difficult for many of them, okay? But it's not to say that something that you have to go through if you're watching this, and it's also not to say that some people experience horrible detox. I know people in the program that the physical detox was much worse than what they had to go through spiritually or with the death of the ego. But I would say it's not as extreme as what I've seen with the death of the ego, right? And so even though some people have to go through worse physical detox, that's myself included, right? For whatever reason, I haven't had to go through such a spiritual awakening sort of thing, right? I've always been what I consider a little bit less arrogant, a little more spiritually awakened, a little more humble, right? But I've had to go through lots of healing reactions, and I still go through them, right? So that includes layers and layers of sinus infections I've had to go through, ear infections I've retraced, detox reactions I've had, and that's what it is for most people, right? So for some people it is a more physical sort of program. But from what I've seen, the people that do have to go through the death of the ego stuff and do have to go through that, it's more traumatic, okay? Some of I've seen clients that have been suicidal, okay, because all of a sudden, they become suicidal because they don't want to live anymore because they realize who they are all of a sudden, right? That's very traumatic. And some of them have to check themselves into the hospital, or all sorts of things, okay? So what do you do, the question is, I guess, also, if you are experiencing such a thing? Well, you're gonna have to move through it, okay? And then it's important to root yourself in something, right? You might need community can be important, going to church. Churches aren't perfect. Some churches are obviously better than others. So it depends. But, most Christian, Judeo-Christian sort of churches, especially in Western society, are better than not, I would say. It might be finding a new work to root yourself in. But I'll especially recommend, rooting yourself in God, and, especially doing the program, doing the pulling down exercise, okay? The pulling down exercise is an important reference point, okay? So you can root yourself in the program and root yourself in doing the pulling down exercise, okay? I think that's very helpful, okay? Or, discovering a new hobby, or, the list goes on, right? But it's something you're gonna have to go through. You can also talking to others can help too. Talking to your practitioner, talking to friends and family that maybe are older and wiser than you are, or just wiser for whatever reason, or maybe they've gone through similar things. I think even a therapist can help. Obviously, some therapists are better than others, and in general, I do think that therapists are overrated because talking about your issues are not as powerful as energetically working through them and healing them. But that's not to say that there's not a place for therapy. There's not a place for some therapists, okay? And obviously some therapists are better than others. So, it's like a chiropractor or something, right? They're not all created equal. So that's important to realize. But, and, remind yourself of self-love, right? So it's very important to remind yourself that, you did the best that you could. So you might hate yourself in the beginning for how you were, and you might hate how you were, and you might think to yourself, how could I have been like that? Well, most of us don't know any better, right? Most of us don't have good parenting. We were put into public schools that taught us, didn't teach us the truth. We were raised off of poor quality food because no one knew any, your parents didn't know any better. Your church leaders might not have known any better, to teach you a certain way. They might have taught you falsehoods as well. And so part of forgiveness is not only forgiving others and how they are, which is also an important part of the program, but also forgiving yourself. Okay? You did the best you could and you didn't know any better. Okay? But now you do, and now it's like, where do you go forward from that? Does that make sense? And so self-forgiveness can be very, very important when you're going through death of the ego. Okay. Just realize that everything happens for a reason, and you didn't know any better, right? No one taught you. How could you have known? Okay, how could you have known the truth about whatever it may be? We have to be taught these things to a certain extent, and if no one taught you, how could you have known? You might have been just a child, or a young man, or a young woman, or whatever, and you didn't know any better. Society didn't teach you any better. Okay, you had to come upon it yourself. Okay, and so you might have to figure yourself 1,000 times, or 1,000 times 1,000 times. Okay, and that self-forgiveness might keep coming up as you move through that death of the ego. Okay, and realize that can also happen in layers. Okay, you might go through different layers of ego. Okay, so you might have a bad retracing where you realize. You go through a trauma or something, and then you realize that you've been arrogant, and then you realize that you need to forgive your parents or whatever. Okay, so realize that it can happen in layers, and you need to keep forgiving yourself through the layers. Okay, but sometimes I do see that it can reach like a crescendo, right, where there is one really bad like ego retracing that they have to go through, and that's where like even people can become suicidal and things like that. So that's important to realize. That a lot of times there is like one really bad moving through it. I'd say that's about it. I think that's all I wanted to talk about in this video. Realize, if it's happening, like I talked about, always remember to forgive yourself. Okay, you didn't know any better, and root yourself in something. Okay, if you had to cast away part of yourself, you have to find something new to root yourself in, so that you have some sort of reference point. Okay, and that can be many things, but I would recommend the pulling down exercise first and foremost. I talk about how important it is. Okay, pulling down exercise. You can root yourself in that. Root yourself in the truth, and it will show you where you need to go from here. Okay, so hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and I'll talk to you later.